This is TWiT.
Amit, I want to explore some more of this, and I want to start with this question. How do you define on the site, what is an open source job? Like, is this have to be someone that's writing code for an open source project? Or does this include people, working on sysadmin for open source projects? Like what all is included in that, and how did you draw that line?
Yep, that's a great question, and something I'm still kind of adjusting as I go here. And I've been getting so much great feedback on Twitter and other places, and have been making changes every day. That's another cool thing about being a one-person project, is that whenever I feel like changing something, I can just get it changed, as opposed to, remember, working in big tech, there'd be a 1-year planning process, and then could actually get us stuff done. But so the definition I've been using right now is something I've borrowed from Joseph Jacks at OSS Capital, which is a VC firm focused on open source. And it's companies it's jobs at companies, but it's really, I guess I'm gonna give you the definition of what an open source company is, which is companies that would not exist without a specific open source technology. So in some sense, every tech job is open source because every tech company depends on open source at this point. But this definition is more narrow, where it's a specific open source project or technology is at the core of that company. And so some of the biggest companies, kind of examples of that, are Databricks, MongoDB, Confluent, GitLab, HashiCorp, Elastic, Automatic, where you guys had Matt, I saw on the podcast recently. So Automatic is the company behind WordPress. So companies like that. So any job at one of those companies, I consider to be an open source job. And so it's definitely not just engineering jobs. There's so many other jobs out there now. Again, whether it's marketing, community manager is a really big job within open source. Sales. A lot of these companies have very serious sales and enterprise sales arms, and all the things that go around sales, whether that's sales operations, sales engineering. And then I do also include open source jobs, as I've built different models to try to flag them at larger companies that aren't open source companies necessarily. So I think I just saw recently there's like a vice president of open source at VMware. And so that job gets included in this. Obviously, if it says open source in the job title, my models can flag that and grab that. Some of the other kind of NLP, natural language processing stuff I'm still working on. So I'd say it's mainly jobs at companies that are defined as open source, again, by this definition, and then some other jobs at other companies that seem to be very focused on open source. But obviously, every engineering job at this point is going to touch open source. So it's not every engineering job. And one other thing I should point out, which maybe is kind of an interesting thing to talk about, is crypto and Web3. And I generally have not included those in this open source job report that I published, or in the open source landing page on TrueUp. I have a separate page and profiles for crypto and Web3, but they actually technically do meet this definition of mostly being built on a single kind of open source technology. So that might be something interesting to talk about, is kind of crypto versus open source. And
yeah, it seems like, for now at least, those are two separate things in a meaningful way.